is a councilwoman for Farmington Hills who is running for the 37th district, the Democratic nomination in the state legislature. Take it away, Sam.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you, Noah, for hosting this wonderful event, and thank you to the Jewish Democrats it's phenomenal. We're a brand new organization, and especially under the leadership of Noah, we've been able to get so much accomplished. It's been a wonderful, wonderful organization, and I've been so proud to be a part of it from the very beginning. So, good evening. I am Samantha STECKLOFF. I have been serving on the Farmington Hills City Council for the past 7 years. I have a long, long history in Farmington Hills. I have been actively involved for the past 25 years. I go way back to when I was just 10 years old, being one of the founders of creating programming for my age demographic with our groundbreaking after school programs. A few years later, with my intense community and connection with my community, I moved on to create Mayor's Youth Councils throughout the state of Michigan, as well as traveling all over the country. I was able to serve on boards and commissions while I was in high school. So I've always had this strong connection to community and government and policy, but I just didn't know what I wanted to do at the time. So while I was at one of these national programs promoting Mayor's Youth Councils, I actually met the mayors of Lafayette and West Lafayette, Indiana, where I knew I was going to school. I was going to go to Purdue University. So I walked up to them and just casually introduced myself and said, hey, you guys have youth in your community. You need help? And so from day one, we were able to start creating Mayor's Youth Councils and after-school programs. So while I was at Purdue University, I worked with our Indiana League of Cities and Towns, which is the exact same for the Michigan Municipal League, just for the state of Indiana, helping create those programs. And I was actually the youngest youth coordinator in the country. But while at Purdue University, I studied foreign policy with my emphasis in crimes against humanity as well as international law. So originally, I was studying to enter the Foreign Service. I wanted to be a human rights officer. And in 2012, when lame duck session happened, everything kind of went out the door. So in 2012, lame duck session, that is when all of these awful things were pushed through. Number one, an emergency financial manager. Even though just 1 month prior, the residents of Michigan overwhelmingly voted against this. So it almost took away your voice. It pretty much took away your right to vote. And then in 24 hours flat, they start ramming through right to work. And that is when I had it. That was the final straw. So I figured, you know, life changes. You don't always follow your original plan, but I knew it was time for me to put my name on the ballot, and I ran for city council. I have been honored to serve on Farmington Hills City Council for the past 7 years. One of the few things some of my greatest accomplishments was I was able to pass, I co-authored a human rights ordinance. It was the first one in the state that actually took on transgender rights. It may have taken a while to get passed, but I finally got it passed unanimously. And that was something I was so proud of, not only for my council, but for the community to recognize the importance that all lives are sacred in our community. Number two, being able to really focus on environmental sustainability. Every time a new land development program came forth, even if they were getting a tax incentive, I would consistently bring up, we need to build with quality materials. We need to make sure that these buildings last. And if I'm giving you a tax break, I want to make sure that you're taking care of my community and making sure that you are implementing some sort of certification, not necessarily going through the process of being LEED certified, but definitely making sure that you are making attending to all those requirements. And unfortunately, I was voted down 6-1. I was voted down. So I am still in shock that I was voted down 6-1. And the reasoning behind it was that they didn't want to put extra regulations on building companies. And two, unfortunately, of those people that voted against bringing in environmental stability standards are actually my opponents in this primary race. On top of that, Christine, I can't believe I heard your story. I was diagnosed with breast cancer at 31 years old, and it completely changes your life. But I knew that turning adversity into advocacy is one of the greatest powers you can bring to the table. So I started really focusing on community health, and I saw a lot of gaps. So what I was able to do was work with all of our community hospitals, work with all of our community health organizations, and created the Commission on Community Health. It's the first of its kind in the entire state of Michigan. And we make sure that community health is not only being provided by hospitals, but also making sure that you have local government and you have government government assistance provided behind it to make sure that all people have access to a quality health care. I am so excited to be running for state representative. I have received every union endorsement there is out there, and even more of our elected official endorsements. And that means a lot to me because I strongly believe in the foundation of relationships. These aren't relationships I formed overnight. When I was working in 2008 on Obama's campaign, that is where these true friendships began. And as you've seen as through the decades progress, those relationships have become so important, and that's why I've been able to excel so much being a member of the city council. You can have so many ideas, but if you don't know who to partner with, you don't know where to go, it can take a lot of additional time. So because of that, I'm ready to hit the ground running day one. But I want to bring it back a second, and I want to talk about why it's so important that we make sure we have some Jewish Democrats in the state legislature. Because of term limits, we have 0. If we do not elect any Jewish Democrats this year, we will have 0 representation at the state. And some of our principles are under attack. About 8 years ago, the state legislature moved to make sure that all human waste, so if you have an autopsy or if there's any sort of health procedure done, that those, it's going to sound a little gross, but those body parts or whatever was taken out, tissue cells, whatever it has been, is considered waste. And in Judaism, you are to be buried with all of your belongings. And so this would have been detrimental to Jewish traditions and Jewish culture and Jewish faith. So we need to make sure that we have people in the state legislature who understand so many of these rules, especially when we're entering this whole new climate with COVID. We're going to have to make very, very tough decisions. I am one of only 2 Jewish Democrats running in the entire state, and both of us are in very big primaries. So I want to just reiterate the fact and continue to talk about the importance of having a Jewish voice in the state of representatives. A lot of it also has to do with our culture and our foundation. Judaism strongly believes that an educational foundation is the greatest foundation you can have. And with Megan and Lori and Christine talking about it, yes, and Megan, I want to use your term, the Betsy DeVos, her agenda is destroying this state. I worked at Wayne State University as a manager of undergraduate admissions, and it was very sad to see the future that's being destroyed by Betsy's DeVos, by the DeVos family. When I have a student come in with a 4.0 GPA and an 8 ACT score, there's something wrong. There is a disconnect. And every single one of those came from a for-profit charter schools. So not only are for-profit charter schools stealing money away from our public institutions, from our qualified teachers, they have absolutely no accommodation. They don't have to meet any sort of standards that the rest of our schools do. Technically, for-profit charter schools are legal, but we get there because they are considered under an agency. And on top of that, agencies take about 3% of the funding per pupil. They don't have to have the same certifications that our teachers have in public schools. So when I say they're stealing money, I mean they are stealing money, they are stealing our youth's voice, because if they don't receive the proper education, there's nowhere for this state to go. And I live here because we were the first state, and we're still just one of 3 states that in our state constitution guarantees a K through 12 education. We cannot continue to step away from all of the wonderful things we've done for our students. On top of that, yes, we need to make sure that public health is accessible for everyone, because I was lucky when I was diagnosed with cancer. I was 31 years old, but I have phenomenal health care. But it still didn't stop me from having problems. One of the biggest mistakes I made in life, and I will tell you this, the biggest mistake I made in life was leaving my union job and moving into management. Because when I was diagnosed, I was no longer eligible for short-term disability. And in order for me to receive any of my funding, I had to be out of work for 180 days to be eligible for long-term disability. So we need to make sure that we are improving people's livelihood, and unions are the best way to do that. We talk about equality in pay. We talk about pay equity, making sure you have a job that can sustain a future for your family. We're going to be heading into some very rough patches with COVID. So we really need to make sure that we create a strong labor force so that everyone can have a wonderful future. And I want to leave some time open for questions.
Thank you so much, Sam. Does anyone have any questions for Samantha STECKLOFF? Let's see, let me check the Facebook Live. Sorry. Okay. Okay, well, I have a question.
All right.
Yes, why not? I mean, I loved how you talked about the fact that it's really important to, obviously we're the Jewish Caucus, part of our values, our vision, and our priorities as an organization is to increase Jewish representation in Michigan politics and in government, to make sure that we want all communities to have representation. We also want our communities to have representation, particularly at a time in which, as you said, anti-Semitism is at a rise. Not just when you're looking at the state capitol and seeing Hail Whitmer and all these horrible things. How will you use your voice, if you are elected, to support your Jewish constituents? Obviously, Farmington Hills is a pretty Jewish area. To that end.
People often forget about the pain that Jews, I feel like, still have in public eye. I can't even tell you the amount of times someone came up to me, unfortunately, and thank you, parents, looked at my nose and said, well, I need you to make sure you accept Jesus Christ. And it's almost like you say, whoa, how is this acceptable to just come up and say that to someone? But it's not just Judaism, and it's not just Jews, but we look at this entire movement of the social justice movement, and that's what we have been a part of for our entire lives. We talk about the freedoms we have, and so often, so while I was working at University of Michigan Hillel, one of the biggest programs we would put together was a community Passover, and it was between our Hillel organization as well as some of our African-American organizations. And we came together because at some point there's an underlying understanding of what it's like to not be free. While ours happened centuries ago, it doesn't dismiss any notion that slavery is okay. And with this whole Black Lives Matter movement and this movement towards social justice, and the feeling you have, this excitement and exhilaration to make sure that we are finally taking care of everyone. And that's what's so important, because we truly believe in social justice. And as your representative, I have not yet shied away from controversial issues, as I've said, especially with the Human Rights Ordinance. But I am so grateful because I have been endorsed by, so many organizations, equality organizations, and I've worked with the ACLU. It's almost like this true calling and this true partnership to be your representative. I would hate to say that it's going to be so easy for me just to go in and stand up to people, but that's not how it works. You have to be very calculative on how you make change, because it very much needs to start with a strong education. So bringing in social justice, we also need to talk about the educational component and making sure that American history truly reflects American history and truly reflects immigrants and African Americans and Muslims and Jews and everything that we've been a part of for this society, and we so often feel left behind. So that is why I'm running for office. I've been wanting to run for a very long time and take care of my residents, not only here in Farmington Hills, but all over the state of Michigan. And I'm going to be bringing a different perspective. The foundations I was built upon are sometimes different than others, and I'm so glad to share it. I know I'm running out of time, but just real quick, I want to bring up a quick story that shows how so often we forget about Jewish voices outside of Metro Detroit. And because this is the Jewish Caucus, I'm bringing this up. When I was at Purdue, at my dormitory, you could get a free hamper by filling out some sort of paper. And I know all of you who have been to college your freshman year remember all of those things. And it was about your religion. And I'm going through each check mark and line and line and line, and I was astonished. I said to the woman, I said, I'm sorry, I don't see Judaism on here. I had to check other. So I hate to say this, but this is still reality here, folks. It's still reality. So if the minorities, if we don't continue to work together for change, and all of our allies for change, it's a lot has to do with the educational component and teaching people.